the legislative item from planning? Permits. Okay.
Okay, so the property owner at 252 Wolf Street, they're requesting permission for the original roof structure to, remain in its existing, presently at 14 feet into the right-of-way. So.
Did you have I know you emailed this over, did you have any copies of it?
No, but I can get copies and
we can make copies.
Send them over. Yeah.
Is it 14 feet or 14 inches?
14 feet into the right of way. 14 inches into the right of way.
Okay.
That would make more sense.
All right. What's the name of the business?
I'm not sure of the name, but right now they're doing some first floor renovations and they're going to be remodeling their storefront.
Okay.
Yeah.
And these. It's 252 Wolf Street.
Yes.
It's Hogan's district.
I'm trying to look on here and see the name of the business.
I'm not sure if it was a new business moving in and they're making those renovations because the request came from the property owner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I hear it just says first floor storefront.
Yes.
But they haven't identified like exactly what business is for, right?
No.
Okay.
But if you need me to look into it, I can find out for you.
Okay, just so we'll know, but
okay,
that's fine.
Okay.
And then on here it shows the owner right there on the bottom.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Michelle Sapiansky, Housing and Neighborhood Planning Coordinator with Neighborhood and Business Development. So the list of items that we have for this upcoming council vote, the way that we arrived at it was basically looking at across all the properties that were in the phase where are there kind of clusters of you have multiple properties that are here right now. It is distinct from the list that we put forward most recently in that there's a kind of spectrum of additional activity or not additional activity happening in addition to the fact that there's kind of groups of tax delinquency. So there's 3 kind of ownership clusters that are a part of this list. So first I will talk about is Equity Trust Company. This is a kind of interesting case. It's essentially a financial services firm that helps people that want to do any type of alternative investment type situations. So although there is a pretty wide network in their portfolio that exists in Syracuse that I have outlined, I put together a memo similar to what I did for the previous vote that I will send out tomorrow so that you can kind of review that in detail. The properties that are listed on this particular list all appear to be associated with one distinct person that's in Yonkers. And I kind of go through, this is a weird one, so you can take a look at it and let me know if you have additional questions. The second group that we have going here is this Elbow Properties LLC. They are a group that we have some records of them being in previous phases and redeeming. There's within some of those properties have had cases on record with codes in the county health department. So they've kind of been around in some of those radars previously. They are based in North Syracuse, so they're all going to the same tax billing address. The last cluster is this Terry Family Irrevocable Trust. This particular case, and the reason I kind of make the distinction of the main thing of how these all got grouped on here was the fact that there was multiple properties owned. In looking into this, we don't really have any additional information on our radar at all to any degree that there's other layers of places where they're not in compliance, either from kind of a codes or a health department standpoint. They're here locally. There's some of the stuff that we had on them was essentially they got called up for a rental registry and they've gotten family-based exemption. So I think this is more of a case of, to our knowledge right now, there's just a cluster of tax delinquency as opposed to some of these, our previous list, which was a lot of like the worst of the worst frequent flyers. So.
Okay. So yesterday, after our council meeting, one of the relatives of the owners of one of the LLCs came up and was interested in like making a payment now once it has gotten to this point. So what's the process like put in place for them to not be able to come and purchase after or sell it after, and then it could just goes over to another LLC?
So I think there's like two answers to your question. They can sell it at any time, regardless of the taxes existing and being current or not current. Whoever owns the property is then responsible for the tax payment. So even if they decide at any point in this process that, you know, they're kind of not paid, with the exception of at the point at which it fully transfers to the land bank, at that point, once the land bank assumes ownership, then those taxes are.
And what's the time frame from that?
It's usually, in an average case, about 12 weeks from the time that the council votes on it, and that's also subject to if there's additional kind of title work that has to happen, so that can definitely vary from that regard. The other part of your question of if he wanted to pay, there's an additional kind of 30-day notice that goes out once the council votes on it that is sent from finance that is saying kind of you have 30 days from this point and then we will be foreclosing. So there's still additional notices that will be sent, but you can pay up at any point until.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I know that one of the problems have been in the past, to the point of your question, is that what people do when they get their final notice, they try to quit claim deed it to somebody else. And so that's been a problem for a long time. The strategy there is that the entire process starts over because it's a new owner. And so they try to get the time to get up the money. And if they can't, some properties have changed hands probably 3 and 4 times in the past.
Yes. Just
running from people. This is why the policy was put in place that a family member couldn't be the recipient of the property, you know, early on. So we may have to give that some more thought and consideration on how to deal with that.
Right.
I guess the other concern or another thing that people may be unaware of, even though the council votes for foreclosure, because the foreclosure process takes a short while, the existing owner still has a chance to pay their taxes to get it back before it forecloses.
Absolutely.
Obviously, a good number of them fail, but some of them succeed. A few of them succeed. But I think we have to give real consideration to this whole tactic of quit claim deeding the property off to get away from the taxes and then just to keep the city from seizing it. Last thing I add in that respect is sometimes they can't give it to a relative. So they give it to the relative's relative. And there appears to be separation, but there really isn't.
Yeah, it's immensely difficult to track that too.
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
How often is this? Does this happen?
A lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how many, so like on some of these, in the note section, were you finished?
Yeah.
It says in 2 previous phases, so some of them were already, they had gotten to this point already, and so now this would be the 3rd time we've gotten to this point. So at what point do we stop them from like continuing this process? Is there something put in place to where they can't keep doing this for several phases?
The way that we've done this kind of operationally is that's where we still kind of the way that MBD is sort of carried out this process. We put them forward to the council. It's the council's discretion as to how they want to proceed with that. So I simply am providing the information about the records that we have on hand. And
But after, so even after this, so say we vote on it in 2 weeks and then they come and then they pay on it. And then another 5 years goes by or 2 years and then they do the same thing. Like
I'll give you an example. We had one list. The list was supposed to be pretty much all just one particular person that had 15 properties that were delinquent, and they came in and paid $110,000 last week. So we had to
And
That happens all the time. It's very frustrating.
in this instance, the very fact that the gentleman mentioned quick claim deed, the likelihood is that he still will.
Right.
Somebody alerted him to the fact that he can unload them to somebody else, and he'll still do that. And so that process for those properties, for example, that we voted on yesterday, will start over. But I was just saying to Councilor Green that I'll speak to Joe Berry to find out if that's something we can affect locally or if it requires state legislation. It's hard when you're talking about free enterprise to stop private-to-private sale. That's the tough part.
Okay. And on the occupancy, a lot of these are rental occupied, and some of them are, you have one that's vacant too. Two that are vacant.
Yep.
So I guess yesterday on our list that we had,
Crazy.
some of them were listed as rental occupied, but when you actually drive by the properties, they are vacant.
Right.
So like, how accurate are we with updating this?
So the occupancy as it exists on your sheet is based on a kind of a combination of factors that are entered into different places in the data set. So this is not perfect by any means, but it's
Okay.
kind of our best guess of what we have across all of our various inputs. Now, this again assumes that all of that is happening correctly. So the main things that kind of go into that calculation are whether or not code enforcement has marked it as vacant or occupied, whether or not the property has a star exemption, whether or not the water is currently active, and if the tax billing address matches the assessed address. So there's points kind of, and basically based on those four things, the property is assigned a score, and then that's how we kind of approximate some of these. It is not perfect by any means, and kind of like you will find the ones where they're, for whatever reason, like the water's still turned on, and that we haven't gotten any type of trigger for code enforcement to go out and inspect it. I do know that one of the properties that was on the list yesterday, one of the butternut ones, the county health department had marked it as vacant, but sometimes their definition of vacant and ours is slightly different because they're usually tracking movement of particular children. So
Okay.
just because they're saying that it's now vacant for them does not mean that the structure is vacant in the same way that code enforcement considers it vacant. So, on some of these, if we have particular kind of red flags that come up, so like the Terry family one, we did like within MBD kind of a couple additional layers of looking into it because we had questions about it. So yeah, I think it sort of depends. You can't necessarily take it as gospel, but we try to approximate and then drill down from there.
Okay. Any other questions? You good?
Love to hear from you.
She said psych.
These are, sorry, I got here late. These are all the properties that we're doing in a big swoop.
Well, they're all the ones that are coming forth on
next
your
agenda.
next
Upcoming
list.
agenda.
Yep.
And
swoop is
how many of those are part of that larger swoop?
So that was,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, so
Okay.
this has a bit of a spectrum. The kind of main common denominator with all of these properties was that they owned multiple properties that are delinquent. So essentially, everyone on this list has at least 4 properties. There is a spectrum that exists on this list of having lack of compliance in other areas. So I have a memo similar to what I did for the last vote list that I'll be sending around that kind of gets into it in detail. But if you have questions, let me know.
No, it's good. So is there something, sorry, to Councilor Bay's point, I forgot that was yesterday, we voted on that large swoop. Is there a change in enforcement technique that we're seeing here with a pattern in that?
It's just the order in which we put them on the list. So not necessarily a change in, I think like my goal is just from a kind of process, like to your Councilor Allen's point about we're seeing properties are coming on and get it again in multiple phases, like trying to kind of cluster things into different categories beyond just how we had previously done it, which was to first take all of the vacant residential properties and then all of the rental occupied properties and kind of trying to get like some additional kind of commonalities between them of how they're going forward. So.
Makes sense.
Okay.
Councilor Allen?
Yep.
We have one item related to the census, which is not yet, a letter has not yet been submitted to the clerk's office, but we would like to try to get it on your March 16th agenda. Would you be willing to
That's what Tori
have
had?
Tori present that to you at this point?
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Yep.
Thank you. And you can start.
Sure. So this is the New York State ESG grant that we had discussed a couple weeks ago. Kind of the request here is for us to be able to redistribute the portion of the grant that's mandated to go to nonprofits. So the city is expected to receive about $200,000 as part of this grant. And of that, the state has mandated 75% must be re-granted to nonprofits. So we have been working to identify a partner that would be able to help manage that redistribution process. You have a letter, the second sheet of paper here, from the Community Foundation. They have offered to manage that process for us and will not be charging an administration fee to do so. So we're asking for your permission to be able to partner with them to manage that. They can also manage the reporting process on behalf of the organization, so they would be collecting the outcomes that would come back to us, and the city would ultimately report to ESG. The other piece of this is permission to, with that remaining 25%, which would be just under $50,000, we're looking to partner with Onondaga County Community Development on a joint advertising campaign from May through July.
Okay. Just as a refresher, what were some of the nonprofit organizations that are actually going to be doing it?
Sure. So the organizations had to be pre-approved by New York State. We also asked that they submit a proposal and a budget for us to review. Some of those organizations, and we're still determining if they'll be funded out of the city or the county's budgets, but it's Access CNY, NEDA, the 4 city community centers, the food bank, Peace Incorporated, RISE,
Okay.
TNT. There's probably 15 total that have applied, and we anticipate enough funding to be able to grant to all of them.
Okay. Question?
These are correct count information centers, or are they charged with helping in hard to count areas?
Both. So we asked them to submit proposals of ways that they would be able to support outreach activities. So some of them have given us proposals for door knocking programs, for hosting outreach events at their centers. I think most of them also anticipate to either be a site where people could come and respond to their census, or through, like in the case of RISE, they have they do a lot of their work through home visitors that are actually visiting families, so they would be helping people in their own homes to complete the census. But the grant itself is meant to fund outreach and tracts and communities at risk of undercount.
One of the concerns I have, as you know, Tori, having previously been heavily involved when I worked with the state senate, and we worked with the bureau, Census Bureau, to do the count, is that what makes areas hard to count is not just the fact that there may be more people living in a house than reported and the like. It's also because the outreach programs never go in those neighborhoods. And it kind of sounds like some of the same organizations who didn't do well the last time. Naturally, when I think of the West Side, which has two of the hardest to count census tracts, and I don't hear La Liga, and they weren't involved last time either. Now that's obviously not our fault if they didn't, but they may not be aware of the need to be involved, but who better than La Liga to break the language barrier on the West Side, to improve the count there. Last time we had a census count and we had a lot of steam going on, they were hiring people who were scared to go into neighborhoods. And so, yeah, it's kind of like the same people, you know, with due respect. And so we may end up with an inadequate count again. And so if you have people that are afraid to go on the near west side and people are afraid to go on the south side and the east side specifically, I don't know what we do there. You know, I didn't hear. I'm not sure if you named the agency on the east side.
So this is just for one grant. I would add that we have multiple grants and programs, areas where community partners can partner with the city on outreach activities. And so you mentioned La Liga, they're working with us. They've identified, I think, 3 individuals that are going to be connected with Huntington, one of the centers that's receiving funding from the city for a paid canvasser program. So this is just a piece of the outreach work that's going on. I would say in total, the organizations that I'm working with, we're connected to probably 40 or 50 different agencies directly that have also been working within their own networks and coalitions. So even though La Liga and some other, grassroots, very key organizations haven't been named here, it's likely that they're involved with us in other ways.
Okay. Any other questions?
I may have another one, but somebody else can go if you have one. I maybe more of a statement, because I certainly appreciate the effort, and I think if we could, though, and I don't make the statement under the assumption that it's not happening, Tori, but if we could just kind of be mindful of, I guess the inadequate performances in the past, if that makes sense. When I think of the east side, I know you have the Peace Incorporated office up there. They have the Let Me Be Great effort they have up there. Just to be blunt, those people are not afraid to walk that neighborhood. Other people will be. Even people who look like us won't walk that neighborhood, just to be frank. Just like people up there may not necessarily walk on the other side of town. I think we have to be kind of mindful of that, because that impacts our ability to count effectively as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you have suggestions or recommendations for other organizations to reach out to, please let me know.
Yep, we got it.
Thanks.
So the overall budget is 196,000, correct?
That's what we anticipate, yeah.
Anticipating? Mm-hmm. So under the current concept here, how many organizations did you say?
So we had probably 15 organizations that applied for approval from the state, to the best of my knowledge, and submitted proposals to us to review. If we funded them at the amounts that they had requested, we still have, between the city and the county, probably $150,000, $175,000 that we could distribute.
Okay, so where's the other money coming from? Because you're saying if you gave them everything they wanted, you'd still have 150. Where are the other streams of funding besides this 190? Sure.
So the city has this allocation of just under $200,000. So 75% of that must go to nonprofits. The county's allocation is about $260,000. 75% of that must go to nonprofits. So kind of between the two of us, we have about $350,000 for our community that we are working to get to organizations. So even if we funded those 15 that had applied at kind of the maximum amounts they had requested, we still have that 170 that's available for organizations to receive. We would just need that plan. In addition, some of the other grants that the city has received, and where I'd mentioned La Liga, some of the other partners that we've been working with. We have a $20,000 grant from the Census Equity Fund for a community ambassador program. So you all approved us to re-grant that to the 4 city community centers so they could hire residents who live and work in the neighborhoods near their centers to do paid outreach to households. Another grant that we received from the M&T Charitable Foundation that is being used to fund the materials for the ambassador program, as well as a series of events that we're sponsoring throughout April, again in partnership with our community centers and those tracks most at risk of undercount.
So I guess my question is, with 15 organizations, so just kind of a twofold question. What type of sums are those organizations looking for? The 15 different groups, like what is their ask traditionally, typically, and what do they do with that money? It's mostly just paying people to canvass, get out in the neighborhoods and do outreach?
Yeah, so the state has a list of eligible and ineligible expenses that I'd be happy to share with you to give you an idea of how much money organizations are requesting. Some it's just been as little as $4,500 to do a series of events at their community centers. Some it's into the $20,000 or $30,000 range because they do intend to hire outreach workers or provide stipends to outreach workers.
That's generally the range, though, between like 3,000, 4,000 all the way up to 25, 30, somewhere in there in the high end.
Yeah.
Just one last one. Do you have any idea if the number amount per person is the same as it was 10 years ago? In 2010, the federal government allocated $1,900 per person per census tract. Right, and then in the census count year, it was as high as $10,000 per person per census tract. And I'm wondering if the number is the same for two reasons. One, because it's good to know, but two, that's a great selling point to help people understand what it means to be counted, that it's really about the disbursement of resources on top of obviously determining how many representatives we have in the House of Representatives. But, a lot of people don't understand that the chunk of money that comes, including the aim made and all of that, is all relative to the census count. And so, I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. Yeah, I would be happy to share some of that information with you. I've seen a couple different estimates when you try and get it down to that amount per person per year that we receive. But as a state, New York receives over $73 billion per year for, that's just the 55 largest funded programs. In addition, you mentioned the representation piece of this. From what I've researched, we're expected to lose one congressional seat, potentially up to two by an undercount as little as 115,000 people. They think that Syracuse was undercounted by 5,000 people in 2010, so you could see how at the state level missing 115 would be very possible. And so we definitely have information about that I can share with you, and that's part of what we're trying to help our organizations understand so they can convey to residents just how critical it is that they are counted and that they count everybody in their household.
Yeah, I think it's actually a little higher. I think we were undercounted by like 10,000 people, to be quite honest. I think it's that high.
I think the number I've seen for the county was about 16, but
I think we're like 10, man.
Okay. When you get back, would you be able to share with us a list of nonprofits that applied?
Sure.
And then can you also share the curriculum from New York State of what, like the requirements? Just so, because when we're out and about and we're at different community facilities or events and stuff, I just don't want to see an organization receive these funds and then just have a table in their community center with just a bunch of cards.
Yeah, that was going to be my last follow-up question. Was
That's what they did.
obviously this is a race against time with the census coming up, and you're trying to get the money out there and stuff. Are there any metrics to measure impact results, or have I'm assuming it'd be quite challenging with the time frame and what you're trying to do, but are there any?
When it's over.
What's that?
Just to count when it's over.
Yeah.
That's the tough part.
Yeah.
Something that is supposed to be new this year is the Census Bureau has said, similar to the maps that they have showing the predictions of undercount, they anticipate having a tool that will be able to show us in near real time how tracts have been responding. So I think that, that could be a really great metric, just to, one, be able to gauge our work, but also better target areas that have been undercounted. That advertising campaign, the piece of this that I mentioned, that's how we intend to inform that campaign, is looking after this self-response period ends in April, where have people still not been counted, and how can we target advertisements and messages to those areas to encourage people to respond. So I think that's definitely the biggest tool that we'll be looking at to measure progress.
Tori, can you explain a little bit about how the state distributes the funds, like the 40% up front, just so that people have a sense of how we can control the distribution and maybe react to some of that real-time
Sure. So before I give you any percentages to this, I think that some of those numbers have changed a little bit, so that's another thing that I will add to my list to send to you. But to Jen's point, there is kind of a tiered disbursement process with the state. So we get a certain percentage up front that we can automatically distribute to organizations. To receive kind of that next percentage of funding, we have to submit kind of an interim progress report and let them know about the impact that that first round of funding had. The final piece of that, so it's split into three. That final chunk, which I think is 5 or 10%, we'll get in October after we've submitted a final report. So there is, that opportunity for us, kind of accountability for us to be sure that organizations are doing what they're supposed to be doing or what they anticipate they'll be doing before they get that additional funding.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. Did you have anything else? Thank you, Tori.
Thanks, Tori. The only question I have, Councilor Allen, from all of your perspectives, I know your hearing on the CDBG application was just last night. The vote we're expecting you all to take to approve our CDBG application is on the 16th, and we actually have to, by the HUD regulations, submit the application on the 17th, so it's just the day after. I just was curious, from all of your perspectives, if there are going to be other questions that each of you have related to the CDBG proposed budget or anything. If we can obviously provide you additional information, or we can have another ad hoc meeting with the committee if you desire. But I wasn't sure if there were any outstanding questions following the hearing that you all held last night.
Normally what we do is just shift the money around.
I assumed as much, so I just wanted to make sure we're available for whatever questions you have or for conversations about how you might want to
And we'll do it in enough time to where you guys aren't scrambling.
That would be great. Really appreciate it.
All right, thank you. All right, that's it? All right, thank you. It's like you gotta put it in.
Using this bully and do
Talk over it.